Are Samsung about to use only Exynos in the Galaxy S26 Ultra? Let's talk about it. Welcome back to SamMobile TV. You're here with Daniel. I'm just going to sit down and talk in this video. Samsung, it seems, is leaning towards using only Exynos next year. Well, we don't really know. At least at the moment, there's some talk and some conversation on social media that this might happen. And am I for it? Yeah, I think I am. I'm not against them going with Qualcomm or using Snapdragon chipsets, but I think a future for Samsung revolves around Exynos and relying on themselves. If we look at what has made Apple so successful as a smartphone brand, it's a lot down to the fact that they control pretty much the entire pipeline. They control the displays, even though they get other people to manufacture them. They are built around their own specifications and hardware needs. They built all their specs for their internals, but the big one is they control their chips. Again, they don't manufacture anything. Apple technically don't manufacture a single thing. They design the product and then get other people to manufacture it and bring it all together. But the big advantage is that chipset allows them to tightly control everything from end to end. Now, Samsung's never going to have that. Because of the fact that Samsung rely on Google, Android is the base of One UI, and when that is the case, doesn't matter what optimizations Samsung have built in with their hardware, they are still relying on the core Android optimization to sort of power the whole thing. But the switch to Exynos, what it does is it gives Samsung more control. And I think you've seen that they kind of want that anyway with the 4 Galaxy branding from the last Snapdragon 8 Elite chipsets. Because of the fact that Samsung kind of want that differentiation, they don't want to just have the same chip that everyone else is using in their Android flagships. Samsung need that point of difference. They need something to sort of call out. The 8 Elite for Galaxy, the 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy, all of those chips, that little extra speed boost and those little extra optimizations are designed for that. But here's the problem. Snapdragon are continuing to increase their production costs. And that is largely the most expensive part and component of a smartphone. It's the chipset. And whilst the performance that Qualcomm are getting out of these chips are ever increasing, it doesn't make financial sense for Samsung to, I guess, be at the behest of Qualcomm in paying for these chipsets and increasing the handset costs on the global scale. A lot of people are questioning Samsung's lack of innovation and the lack of new hardware features that are coming out on their core slab smartphone devices. A lot of it is pegged down to the balancing act that Samsung have, which is they need to invest in certain areas, and if they overinvest in other areas, the cost of the handset will go up, sales will go down, and then it's goodbye Samsung. That's a very dramatic take, but it makes sense when you really lay it out properly. So, what does a switch to only Exynos mean? Well, if we look at it as like a foundation, a building block as to what could potentially be happening in 5 to 10 years' time, because companies don't just sit there and go, well, what are we going to do tomorrow? Companies sit there and start to plan out strategically what the next 5 to 10 years might look like. For Samsung, a switch to Exynos means that they can start to plan internally what their Exynos roadmap might look like, and then align hardware upgrades to their devices alongside that, as opposed to then having to wait and see what Qualcomm develop and then build around that year on year. They can probably more or less start to align and more tightly integrate their own hardware together. They can build custom stuff into their own Exynos to suit their image sensors and their graphical power. They can build all that together. That's just something that they'll have the capability of doing if they own the entire process. They can optimize and build in battery and power efficiency, which means they can give you better battery life and better battery performance over longer periods of time. And we must not forget that Samsung Semiconductor is a huge player in the semiconductor space. They aren't just sitting there making nothing. They are a huge manufacturer of chipsets, memory, and RAM, and I think a lot of people forget that. So they're not going to just sit there as well and make nothing. They're going to compete in this space. Samsung are a very proud company, and if there's a space to compete in the technology world, they're going to go for it. But what does that mean next year for the S26? Frankly, I don't think you're going to see the payoff next year. Whilst there's all these rumors of the Exynos 2600 being above whatever the 8 Elite 5, or whatever Snapdragon calling the next chip, it's a mouthful. Whilst it might not be above or better, or it is better, that's yet to be known, the thing that it does is it starts Samsung off on the journey. It also will allow them to reduce the overhead costs of building the device and maybe see some slight upgrades in the hardware in next year's S26. But I don't think you're going to see drastic changes because of it yet. I think the payoff will be S27, S28, and depending on what they end up doing, if they build a laptop around it, that could also be where you start to see payoffs start to happen. There's a lot of outrage around this move, and I completely understand it. As someone who I guess is in tune with the processors that my phones use, I've seen and used Exynos at its worst. And those were in the days of the Exynos 990, that was in the S20 Ultra, and the Note 20 Ultra, especially here in Australia. And I got to tell you, from a performance, they were okay for our day-to-day usage, but a battery efficiency and longevity, just absolutely awful. But here's the thing, we know, but other people don't. The majority of users just absolutely have no idea, because really, that should have killed Samsung, especially for people who know. The Exynos 990 chipset could have been done with, and then Samsung could have been done with as well. But the next year, Exynos 2100 launched with the S21 series here in Australia too, and Samsung went and had a hugely successful launch with the S21, proving that it's not just down to what chip is in the phone. There's other things that sell phones, like software, cameras, design. The S21 Ultra was incredibly well designed. The Exynos 2600 is not going to tank Samsung's sales. In fact, I think it'll end up doing quite the opposite. It will free the shackles for Samsung to do more with their phones because they're using their own internally house-made chip and allow them the freedom to build more around it. But the thing is, the Exynos 2600 still isn't that chipset that's been perfectly tweaked and optimized for the S26 series. Samsung will build things around it, absolutely, into One UI, for sure. But it's not like the A16 Pro. It's not like Apple, the way they do theirs, because Apple build that chip for that phone for that year. Samsung Semiconductor is operating as a separate business to Samsung Mobile. So they are building the Exynos 2600 to be the best it can be, with the hope that they can then sell it to other manufacturers. It's the same thing that Samsung Display does as well. They build display panels and sell it to other manufacturers. Same things with the Samsung camera sensors. They build it for other manufacturers. So whilst Samsung have the capability to build a lot of these high-end performing hardware pieces, it doesn't necessarily translate to going straight into their new flagships, because Samsung Mobile is a customer of Samsung Semiconductor. Until Samsung Mobile can kind of build their own chip specifically for Galaxies, I think Exynos is probably the closest solution they have to that tight integration into their devices. But don't be panicked by the move to Exynos. The days of the 990 are well and truly gone. I think the problem will be is if Samsung starts selling two different models, Snapdragon in one, Exynos in the other, and there's performance disparity. You either ditch Qualcomm altogether and go all in on Exynos, or you leave Exynos for another time and stick to Qualcomm. This in between is just not okay. You can't go to one country and get an S26 Ultra and then go to another one and experience a different one, because I have seen it where the split has different performance capabilities, and that's just not on. What do you think? Will you be put off by the Exynos 2600 if Samsung leans in that direction? Or are you okay with that change in the hope that long term it might make things better? I could go either way. I just know for me, I don't use Samsung purely because of the chipsets that they use. I use Samsung because of One UI, because of Good Lock, because of their ecosystem. That for me is why I stick with Samsung as a brand. It's not just about the chip that powers the phone. It's what the chip that powers the phone enables the phone to do. And look, at this stage, chipsets are very powerful no matter which one you pick up. So you're going to be okay. Hit subscribe to SamMobile TV. Go check out our website for more opinions and thought pieces. We've got all the coverage on there, as well as all of our social media. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.